on the call, make a video recording of these, and I do post them after. We've got folks who expressed interest in being part of it, part of the conversation, but can't always be here. So I hope that serves all. The broad topic today was AI and regulation, and there's that gives us no small things to talk about. So let me sort of situate a little bit the conversation that or parts of it that were on my mind. Boy, oh boy, it's going to be old home week here. As some may know, not only have we been thinking and talking about AI in this group, and I've certainly been thinking about it, writing about it for quite some time now. But then in the last few weeks, Alex Ryan and I, who's on the call, and a small team, also put together a proposal for OpenAI's call for processes, the design of processes that might permit democratic input into AI, as the proposal described it, and so had some practical stress on some of the thinking, not the least of which was what even if we're successful in doing this, where is that we're going to end up? I think there are plenty of reasons that we could be concerned, if not cynical, about OpenAI and its motives in opening up this call. But one of the things that for sure came up was the broader questions of what would democratic input, what would democratic participation in the governance of AI look like? What could it look like? And one of the starting points for me in that is the recognition that we don't have currently competent, at least in the sense of it's nobody's prescribed and globally accepted responsibility to govern AI or any other such pervasive technology. That's certainly, there are government organizations and bodies that do this, that make policy, that even make law. Obviously, the EU has recently updated some of its technology law, particularly around AI. The US, has made a sort of initial foray into AI policy making, but it's still kind of nibbling around the edges, and there's nothing like new law. But I think the question of democratic participation, raises the question of, hey, what does democratic participation look like, period, these days, let alone in things of the nature of AI. So maybe that's a good place to start the conversation. And I know some of you have been poking around in participatory processes and participatory democracy. So interested in things that you may have seen, observed, heard about, or in fact been part of designing, that are worth putting into the conversation. Yeah, Claudia.
I would love to be able to kind of start this because for Peel Regional Police, which is a region in the GTA right outside of Toronto, Canada, I've been commissioned to exercise a statement of principle around the use of AI and new technology in policing. Now, the narrative about this came out of another um, process that I went with the city of Mississauga, which is part of Peel. Peel is a two-tier system with has Brampton, Caledon, and Mississauga. So for the mayor there, Bonnie Crombie, and her council, we did a Black engagement strategy to empower Black communities. What I discovered was the Black communities were consistently placed in relationship to police in a reactionary adversarial position. So CNN shows something horrible happens, the community reacts. Gives no room for partnerships, and it reinforces the status quo of one hating the other and the other demonizing the other, right? So I figured that I started realizing this pattern and said, what could we do that would create partnership that would kind of have that an empty canvas? So to allow for proactive, and collaborative relationship. And I thought AI, because many people in the communities didn't really quite know what AI was, would be a wonderful place to start. One of the people that were involved in the discussion, so we had a discussion out around AI, new technologies within the equity discussion. We brought someone, Barbara McPhail from the Canadian Civil Liberties, and she educated me and she said, Claudia, don't go the legal route if you wanted to. Montreal tried to do that, and it was just a fun fest for the lawyers, and nothing could get through. Everyone, again, reactionary, and everyone put their heels in. So if you made it non-legally, but you legally bound and made the community be a part of a discussion where the police can actually, I think they were trying to do something similar in Oakland, where they can have a discussion and where people can have a statement of principle. The statement of principle is not going to be legally bounding per se, but it does a couple of things. It educates the public on what really AI is. So now I'm going to start there, and I'm going to actually start to get to what Michael was alluding to. What I've discovered is that we have to go way back, like do the Socraterian thing. What is really AI? Right? In the pure sense, its ecosystem and its capacity and its application. Then I had to have that set of facts. And then we had to figure out, how do we, the collective we, talk about or think about AI and what we think it is? Because if you go in a room of people and you actually just listen to people talking about AI, they're not necessarily talking about the same thing. So when we talk about democracy, we have to establish where the benchmark is, the facts is, and then democrat make that the definitions democratic, or else it's like the Tower of Babel. Everybody's talking, they think they're doing something the same, but it's all over the place. And then how we talk about it. So again, you listen to the Fox or the CNNs, and you go into chat rooms. How we talk about AI, maybe even not really connected to what AI is. So you sit down with a bear in a pub and you talk to someone about AI, and they'll talk to you about the Terminator. Right? They're not getting into algorithms and data sets and data training, right? So like that's not what they're talking about. So now how do we get everybody at the baseline before we can even talk about democratizing the subject matter? We have to kind of bring everybody back to what the basis. So I did this exercise with chat and I actually asked about 62 questions around AI, just to have fun. Like, let the AI teach me about itself. And when you look at the ecosystem of AI, so outside of you got computer vision, you got language, you got all these things that go into our cell phones or our cars. So I'm going to stop there and do another poll of information. Then we talk about governance.
Hang on, Claudia. Let's just press pause for a sec. We'll come back to this, but just let's go around a bit. Any folks other with both direct experience, whether it's in participatory processes, whether they were directly around AI or not, but where it sort of influenced your thinking in some of the problems that we're facing, which, as Claudia points out, start among other things with an unequal footing in language, right? We are all coming into these conversations with all kinds of furniture in our heads, which may or may not map neatly onto the things we're talking about, but nonetheless shape how we think, how we hear things, how we react to things, and so on. So, other thoughts, other experiences to share?
Michael, one thing I'm happy to share is when Cyborg Labs was looking to set up its smart city in Toronto, about 300 meters from my home, we got involved in that conversation with Waterfront Toronto, and one of the technology proposals that got raised early on to deal with the real privacy concerns, and Canadian Civil Liberties Institute was also very heavily involved in those conversations, was this idea of a data trust. If we're going to have IoT sensors embedded in the city, if we're going to have advanced systems that collect data to learn and get better, could we think of some kind of privacy protective data sharing approach? And so this idea of a data trust came up. The problem is similar to what Claudia is saying, is you can't just go out and street intercept people and ask them what they think about data trust, because people don't have it. It's too abstract, it's too technical an idea. So what we did was we built a board game, turn-based, kind of like Monopoly. Everybody plays a different actor in the ecosystem. Everybody has different outcomes that they're trying to achieve, both public and privately held ones that other actors aren't aware of. You have certain resources at your disposal, and you also get a social license based on how you behave. And so in this game, we were able to give people an experience of having data sets that they owned, having data sets that they wanted, and either being able to enter into bilateral data sharing agreements, or somebody could start a data trust and then pull the data and share it in a privacy protective way. And so this game would take place over about an hour. And then at the end of the hour, you do about 6 turns. Certain things would happen, like there might be events happen. Similar in Monopoly, you go directly to jail. There might be a data breach, and then at the end of that hour of gameplay, you would then sit around and have a conversation around the risks and benefits of data sharing. And so what we found was that the game was both an educational tool for folks to learn about what a data trust was and have a concrete experience of it. The mechanics of the game were simplified, but the social complexity was all there, like the different actors. Sorry, there's someone knocking at my door. We're doing fire alarm testing in the building. But yeah, anyway, that game was a very useful tool for having a better quality conversation.
Yeah, appreciate that. Manuel, Europe? Yeah, I knew something was going on in Amsterdam.
Well, actually, it happened in Washington, D.C. in 2016. I was part of a program by the Center for Global Policy Solutions. I don't know if you know of Maya Cummings.
No.
She used to run this group, and actually Lee Sean, you guys know Lee, some of you know Lee Sean, did this program, and it was basically trying to answer this very question that you're posing today. and it was looking at AI and specifically the challenge in terms of equity and justice. In particular, the Adelphi name came from advanced data equity, leadership, policy, health, and innovation, and looking at it in terms of underserved communities, right, and justice, right, in terms of what happens when the data, is, as we know, is how should we say it? When the data is stolen, the data sets are tested on unwilling users, and when the process is for commercial purpose only, right? And so that was kind of the framework. I'm here just to repeat that there has been work done many years ago around this. And the most interesting part at the end of this event was basically that activism in terms of exactly what Alex was bringing up, in terms of participation, ownership, and self-awareness, right, was the most radical act to be taken as an initial step toward democratization.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Well, any other thoughts? One of the other things that I'll just put out there, people may or may not have had a chance to see. I posted something on LinkedIn about 40 minutes of the call, and it was in part a response to Jeff Mulgan's post on Monday, envisioning the establishment of something that he calls a global AI observatory. Jeff used to be the CEO of Nesta in the UK, and is now at University College London, and is involved in a lot of AI related activity both there and elsewhere. And he envisioned this new body that might provide, as a service, up-to-date knowledge and data that could be drawn on by policymakers and decision makers around the world. And certainly, no objection to the idea of creating more and better facts and making them easier to find, like that. We should all always be for that. Question is, what problem does that solve? And the one of the problems that certainly faces even the question of how, like if one were to take seriously the sentence, how do we properly regulate AI? Doesn't that presume that there is a body with jurisdiction recognized to make effective regulation? Because as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, like, there isn't such a thing. So that doesn't mean that regulation of all kinds of things doesn't happen all the time, and then it doesn't have a certain kind of effectiveness. But one of the things that I brought up in the article was, talking about, to me, what are two big present examples of collaboration on global issues, collaboration and cooperation that has to be global in scope. One of which I think, by any account, is an abject failure, which is not to say that it's only failure, which is the work done in the service of changing anything materially concerning climate. And the other is the global reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. which, obviously much shorter in duration and much more recent in our history. But notwithstanding how absolutely messy it might have been, I do think it's kind of remarkable that the entire planet at every scale of government in every country in the world managed to collectively respond in something of a coordinated way, right? I mean, not like that there's not lots to poke holes in there, but I do think that there's a lot to learn from, and one of the things that's got me the most curious, because this sort of goes counterfactually to what I just said about no single recognized institution with jurisdiction. Almost no new institutions were created to deal with the global COVID-19 pandemic. Which is to say, we made do with what we had. We figured out to use what we had, even if it wasn't purpose-built for dealing with pandemics. And certainly lots of the things that were brought into action were not, fitted out, kitted out for dealing with pandemics. It strikes me it's an interesting case, and the contrast, and I'll make this my last point. The contrast that I'll offer is, the other thing that really distinguishes climate change and the pandemic in terms of threats, right? I mean, they're both threats that have global scope and broad and deep impact, right? The difference is that in one case, people actually existed as if the threat were present and credible. And in the other case, irrespective of what people believe, people have not acted as if the threat is present and credible. And there's something to understand there, I think. So offer that for your thoughts and input. Hey, Claudia. Oh, unmute.
I think someone else was about to speak. I yield.
Was someone else about to speak?
Yeah, I thought I saw someone who was gonna make. Okay, Mike, there's a lot there. you just put like so many things together. Like, there were a couple of concepts that started popping into my mind. Was are we gonna go for speed or are we gonna go for inclusion? Because if we go for speed, a lot of people got to be taken out of the inclusion. When I listen to Manuel and Alex speak, they're ready. The level of discussion that they're at is higher than, I would say, a good 75% of the public in general.
Mm-hmm.
To even get to the board game, to get to, and by the way, Manuel, what was the institute that you said you were with?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it wasn't me. I was part of an initiative that the Center for Global Policy Solutions was putting together at the time to look specifically at this question. How do we engage with democratic forces to manage the negative outputs of AI?
And the final piece I will say, Mike, and then jump back, is much of capitalism. I'm not anti-capitalism by any stretch, but much of capitalism makes its wealth through the imbalanced distribution of knowledge.
Sure.
Right? And
One of the, yes.
a big chunk. And AI is where this is going to be exploited the most. And that will impact increase the vicious cycle that we've seen for a long time in our society, where that unequal, that asymmetrical distribution gets drastically exploded, and you're going to have a lot of people left out of the equation.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, again, Jeff Mulgan, when he was describing major stakeholder groups, named 4: governments, corporates,
Scientists.
scientists and technologists, and basically the NGO sector. He did not mention citizens, right? And you know, I don't think it was an anti-democratic omission, you know, on its face on the one hand, but it is effectively. And you know, all of those organizations, but particularly the non-corporate ones, believe of themselves, right, that they are acting in some form or fashion in the quote unquote public interest, right? And you know, I don't think they're in bad faith about that necessarily, but that doesn't mean that they're participatory organizations in any sense, right? And you know, when I started digging into the process that was used to construct the US blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, again, you know, you don't have to scratch very hard to find out that it was not a participatory process. It was not a process that really sought to engage, not just in a democratic way, but in any kind of creative way, with the broader public. And again, you know, back to the point that Claudia made, you know, there's an educative, you know, problem, which is that none of us really know enough about this, you know, and that's the starting position that we're all in, you know, of whatever sort of scale of experience or education, you know, and I include people who are this up close to, you know, R&D, precisely because they're this up close, you know, their awareness and knowledge has a particular focus, and tends to be focused rather than broad in scope. And so, yeah, Adrian.
Yeah, so sorry, I was going to agree with Claudia in that you laid out a lot of things in the previous comment, but I think you know, and I apologize, I've missed a bunch of these conversations, but I think I would argue that in talking about like the regulation of AI and our need to regulate AI, what we're actually doing is we're accepting a very sort of top-down centrist dogma about how the world runs, and then we're trying to apply sort of a more democratic kind of bottoms-up solution to fixing that problem. And meanwhile we've already sort of seeded the main issue, which is that the AI have largely been created by people that accept top-down central organization is really the default way of doing things. And you know, I think we might have talked about this, but you know, that Harari book, Sapiens, that everyone went crazy about, and Google brought in Harari to basically you know, train them on how to think about the future, was sort of a prime example of it. It sort of posits that, you know, there's been one way that humans have organized. It's really been quite a cynical sort of centralized way, and AI tools, the AI tools we use, they're largely created by people that buy into that philosophy 100%. So it feels to me that as we think about like the regulation of that and our role in that, what we're actually doing is we're sort of giving up and saying, okay, that's exactly the way it is, and now sort of we need to fall into that idea, and then just sort of make the best out of what they've built. And you know, like I said, I missed a bunch of this sort of stuff, your previous conversations, but this to me is at radical odds between what I thought System 3 was about, which was about the exploration of what humanity could be, and you know, how we might sort of understand that if we applied as much time to pushing ourselves forward, as we apply to pushing computers forward or training them or prompt engineering, we might be able to sort of actually build a sort of better world for people rather than just for machines.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, Adrian, and you're right. That is exactly where System 3 came from, because to your point, our dominant thinking is still very much organized around conceptions of expertise, certain kinds of privileged knowledge and authority, rather than the idea that intelligence and thinking is something that emerges through conversation, through shared thinking, through thinking about things together, which precisely makes more evident the dimensions of the object that we're thinking about. I think about this, particularly the more and more I look at the ways in which we're talking about and people are writing about AI. Because as Claudia referenced, again, a lot of what's shaped people's mental models, is science fiction, to begin with, and then in more recent, in the last couple of years, what we piled onto that is the journalistic sort of narratives around AI, which again are not super thoughtful, in the sense that they're not engaged so much in the process of thinking as they are in the process of telling stories of a certain kind, and those stories tend to be of two certain kinds, right? They're either deeply optimistic, hypey kinds of stories, or they're deeply pessimistic, sort of existential dread kind of stories. And again, these are the narratives of techno-optimism, and the fear of technology are long-standing tropes. Question is, how do we get out of these, right? How do we build and design conversations where we can reset the terms of the conversation? Yeah, Adrian, you got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. There was one thing I was going to say. Actually, this is sort of on your previous comment, but maybe it's also helpful in answering the question you just laid out. It is true we've made precious little progress against climate, and someone I know is actually at the most recent COP27. It was the technical meeting in preparation for the sort of the leader meeting. Yep. And she was horrified because basically every single meeting was like they couldn't agree on even when to talk about the subjects, or when to meet to talk about the subjects. She was literally horrified. But then you take the cap and trade system, which we can argue about whether it's good or not.
Sure.
But it's led now to a place where you can actually make more money by burying carbon dioxide than you can by extracting it. Mm-hmm. And so to me, this is a great illustration of like that COP27 is very, very much organized on it's like we've got to get together, we have to create these committees, and we've got to organize in a very classic sense to move things forward. Whereas cap and trade was like we've got to think about the systems that we build that align incentives towards doing the right thing, and then we need to let people do. And again, I'm not a free market theorist by any means, but then we've got to let incentives and let people align towards sort of doing the right things. And I feel like that, that's that's part you know, this is a great example of these two different approaches that we're talking about. One of which is sort of a very organized and logical, again, top-down sort of approach, structured approach. And then the other one is maybe, you know, just a bit more of a human approach where we understand the things that we want to do, and we try to create environments or systems to enable those things to happen. I don't know how that applies to AI, but I do feel like it's, you know, it's an example of those two different sort of approaches.
Yeah, Manuel.
Thank you, Adrian, for that visualization. I think that, you know, Alex and I were presenting two examples at two extremes or two sides of the opportunity for small and bottom-up activities that can initiate the process of democratization. One is looking and for injustice, or focusing on where injustice is happening at this time and actively going against it, right? And the other one is understanding how one's personal actions are then translated or integrated into a data set that then generates value for others. And what is the control that we can have? And what is the self-awareness that we should have in order for us to have more agency, right? So one is reactive and one is proactive. And I think in both of those cases, they are not top-down, right? And I think the interesting part with the carbon trade example is that maybe what we need is a means to codify what these two activities are in terms of the mechanism of generating AI value, right? So forget knowing how AI works, but if you at least know what the inputs are and what the value of those inputs is, and you have control or you have agency towards those inputs, and you participate, you know, I don't need to know how a bill gets signed into law, but I do need to know that, you know, maybe I should write a letter to the congresswoman, right? And it's a little bit the same kind of situation, I think, that right now there is a disconnect between individual agency and participation in terms of the unit of value that one generates, and how that unit of value is an atom in the total mass of what AI is in terms of value creation, and also ultimately exploitation in terms of capital and so forth. And I think that connection may be the missing link right now, that AI feels at this point like it's something that nobody has, you know, that's self-contained, that it's non-human.
Yeah, Claudia, I see your hand. I mean, I'll go to you in one sec. I mean, I appreciate all those thoughts, Manuel. I mean, I think the one that I want to call out is, how difficult it is for a lot of people to see what the pathway to participation could even be, right? Because I think this has been a perennial problem in the climate space as well, right? I mean, it's not that people have no interest or no awareness or haven't heard facts or haven't heard lots of things that concern them, right? The question is, like, what do I do? And, like, 20 years ago, we thought that the answer was install compact fluorescent light bulbs. And then we all realized that that's probably not going to save us, whatever saving us means here. But, and yet, right? I mean, what does it mean to participate? And, I mean, thinking about this has certainly thrown up for me and in some of these recent conversations, that there's the problem, or the cluster of problems at hand, represented under the shorthand of AI on the one hand. There's also just the problems of of democracy and participation, right? Which get implicated in thinking about, hey, how do we participate? Hey, let's say I'm interested in participating. Okay, what do I do tomorrow? And you've used some examples, right? I mean, activism is something that people do and can do. Participating in a variety of things is accessible to some, right? But again, it seems to me that part of what's got my interest right now is the interest in the potential to design for new forms of participation, and in them, and this goes back to the System 3 connection, Adrian, trying to take the opportunity to design ways of bringing people together to think together that will make it possible to reckon with complexity in ways that I think may not be possible from where we stand today, right? I mean, again, a lot of people think that this problem, as they think, I think in the case of climate, is the problem is if the dumb people would just listen to the smart people, like it's problem solved, right? And if only there were a lineup of complex problems that were that easy to solve, then we would have the perfect justification for autocracy, right? Who cares that it doesn't feel good or smell good? It gets shit done. But I think the bottom line problem with autocracy is not simply that it feels unethical to some of us, but it's not clear that it's effective. Certainly not for dealing with complexity. So yeah. Okay. Sorry, Claudia and Manuel, you both have hands raised. I forget who had their hand up first. Let's. I'm gonna assume it was you, Claudia. Okay.
So you hit the nail on the head around the problem with just participatory democracy. We just had an election over here in Toronto. Only 38%, under 38% of the people that could vote voted, right? And I've been very active in politics, trying to get people knocking on the doors, getting people slammed the doors in your face. And one of the things that I discovered was the intellectual politician gets thrown to the side, right? It's cold. Thoughts it doesn't generate emotions, and emotions get people to do things. And so the more that we have an algorithm set that has people responding to the most extreme fearful images or the more extreme, like angry things to get those clicks, it takes more people, it takes a higher level of emotion for people to actually get involved. So by the time people get involved, they're like drunk with like fear, which is not the most productive and emotion to have to actually be creative. So we're going into this weird way where it's like, if I feel like everything's okay and it's a little shitty, then I don't really, that's okay, right? But if I feel like the world is gonna fall apart now, when it's too late to get involved to do anything about it, then where it's like a panic mode, and then these extreme levels of governments and personality traits starts to come in. How do we balance it? And I was invited, and I was a part of Liberal International, talking about how do we govern from the center in a world where algorithms are pulling people further apart. So the knowledge, asymmetrical distribution of knowledge, and these extreme emotions is also one thing to keep in mind. And one more level that Adrian made me think about is these big gaps are creating room for misinformation and conspiracy theories. Like if I could tell you how many educated people I've heard talk about climate change is a new tool for the elites to redesign the new world order, and Davos is about the new world order that is going to oppress us all, and then if you get someone down the road, it's some reptilian culture that we don't even know about. Like, this is it's gone really crazy season. And I think we need to go right back to the basics, or where we really are in the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, I want to chime on one quick thing and then go to you, Manuel. The conspiracy thing, it really it was astounding to me. Not that there was a complete absence of conspiracy theory during COVID, but I mean the COVID response globally, like, really was a conspiracist's dream, right? And the fact that conspiracy during COVID was not nearly as tractable as it has been in other contexts is, again, just kind of interesting, and worth paying attention to. I don't know what explains that, or it may be just my sense of it, but I suspect that I expect there's something there worth paying attention to. Manuel.
I think I'm going back to the fundamental question, and that is how do we turn this conversation into some kind of movement towards a solution, or a movement towards an understanding of what a solution could be, right? So your provocation is, how can we find democratic ways to engage and manage the dangers of AI, if I understand correctly why we're here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think my provocation is, while I'm very interested, as everybody is, in the problem set there, as with lots of people on the call, I think we have in our way some prior problems, right? Which I think,
yes, but
really opportunity to sort of lean into in a new way.
Yes, but since I have done many years of analysis.
Yep.
Now I am at the point where, instead of asking, like, why do I see a penis everywhere, I want to not see a penis everywhere.
Manuel,
that's where I am.
We can always count on you for the keenly observed thing we've all been missing in the conversation.
So let's say we are in this situation, right, where we do not want to see it.
Yeah.
Right? So we basically want to be in a position where AI is no longer a tool that is controlled by the oligarchs of the technology capital, lizard people.
Well, I mean, this is not the answer, right? But just let's take as a case in point, right? Facebook, right? Which nobody has to use, right? And we go on and on about how nasty it is, and or at least the things it does are. And I'll just confess my own particular encounter with that platform, which is, I remember having a conversation in San Francisco with a friend about having the Facebook app on my phone, and it was probably about 6 months after Facebook had gone full in on mobile, and so the app was really after you. And I was complaining about it. She said, yeah, I found the same thing, and I deleted the app from my phone, and now I just have it on my desktop, and it completely changed how much of my sort of attention it commands or interferes with. And I said, oh, that's a pretty obvious idea. Take the app off my phone. And I was amazed how difficult I found it to take it off my phone. Not technically difficult, psychologically difficult. And again, I did take it off my phone, and it stayed off my phone. I just think, again, it's worth remarking the bizarre amount of psychological stress that like seems like super simple thing, super obvious thing to do was. So again, I just think there are to your point, there are real forces that make us see certain things we don't want to see. But simply wishing they weren't there, right, isn't the sufficient answer. I think, for me, right, if we want something different, we've got to make something different that people prefer to participate in. And this, right, remains the challenge. And I've been very interested in Adrian's work over the years. And sorry, this is a bit of a call out, Adrian, but everybody on this call has experience to know that an amazing amount of human creativity, and some of it represented on this call, has gone into helping companies advertise products, and not into a lot of other things, right? And like, we can all understand why, right? I mean, they're perfectly understandable set of things that have caused that to be true. But I remember when Clay Shirky was talking about cognitive surplus, and he was talking about the amount of time that people used to watch television or did watch television, and the way that was shifting, that attention shifting online. And it was just the idea of sort of measuring the amount of cognitive capacity that's being put to use on again, watching game shows. Certainly what I used to do when I went home from school when I was a teenager, right? And I just think, again, about all of the ways in which we spend or waste time. And I think this is not an accident, right? I mean, I've come in my more conspiratorial frames of mind to think, like, this is the effect of a program of domestication that has been enormously effective, right? And you don't need a conspiracy theory about it. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It just has to be true, right? And I think it is true that we, as free populations and democracies, are domesticated. Claudia's point about 38% turnout, what she didn't mention was there were 102 people on the ballot, right? I mean, the information problem alone of
paradox of choice,
right, of wanting to be, like, say you wanted to be serious about making the choice. That's a lot of information, right?
But let's go back to the question.
Yep.
System 3.
Yeah.
AI.
It's the solution.
So what's the next? What is from Adrian? We are mentioning you all the time, but anyway, it's a good thing to just point to someone else as an excuse to ask Michael. So what's going on?
I have no idea, but I mean, the reason why I loved what Michael was doing and the work that we've been doing is because we're in a fortunate position. We have the ear of some big companies, and we can make a tiny little bit of change. And so what we've always really thought about was how do we make the things that are good for us more valuable? And so we got into the carbon space and into healthcare and into all of those things, because it was sort of like we really wanted to align positive outcomes with commercial outcomes, because that was the way that we thought progress was going to be made. And I still think that that's true to some extent. One thing I would say is that really our realization around Web3 is that prior to Web3, you had to align non-commercial systems to a commercial system. And really what Web3 allows you to do is to build an economy around a beneficial system. And I think that that's actually what we're seeing right now, which is we're seeing multiple economies emerge. Carbon is one of them, but there are ecological services economies that are emerging that are really, they're saying, like, fiat currency doesn't serve the benefit of the planet or the betterment of welfare and humanity and so on and so forth. So we need to create an economy around it. But that having been said, I think that that's really sort of what we've been trying to do, is like think about what are positive outcomes first of all for people, and then how would you build a commercial system around those positive outcomes. So part of what I loved about System 3 was there is so much protest around AI, but there's very little conversation around what is a better world for humanity, one in which we kind of like the best ideas and the most valuable ideas come from us getting together and talking about things. And you know, and I think we're so far back because we haven't even defined what those outputs are, let alone be able to think about now how to make them really valuable. So you know, part of my I guess my kind of anxiousness in all of this is like I think we're quite far back. I totally sort of agree with your training sort of comment, Michael. You know, it's sort of like, you know, if we'd wanted technology to take over the world, we couldn't have done a better job, starting with, you know, the Industrial Revolution, where we made human output simple and understandable, you know, and like we're still continuing that same path of basically breaking down what is really interesting and complex about us into very sort of simple and, you know, sort of understandable chunks so that it could be digested by a machine. And
the
so,
human unit is a challenge for economics. That's why we're being constantly, solutions are constantly being put upon us.
I totally agree, and but that's why I think we now have well, and I don't Web3 is not the savior, but we now have the ability to build economies entirely around the things that we want, rather than have to sit in an economic system that that does put, you know, welfare is an externality. So is you know, so is planetary survival, right? They're all externalities. But I would say it's our fault because we haven't defined what are the outcomes that we really want to optimize against, and therefore make the most valuable. So that's my answer to you, Manuel, which is like I just feel like what we need to do is we need to have a much better understanding of what is a human output, and really what is an incredibly valuable human output. And then that would put, in some ways, AI into its place. And honestly, my belief around AI is it's going to become commoditized. It's being built into pretty much every single tool that you can imagine. It isn't going to be massively different. And there was a pretty interesting interview with Penrose, Roger Penrose, just around, like, you know, the fallacy of increased computation leading to consciousness. You know, and his point was, I think you may have seen this, but his point was like,
I totally agree. I know people who have read a million books, they're not smarter than.
Exactly, right? So, but yeah, I mean, again, I feel like there's something different about what we do, and we really need to fully understand it, and then build value around that, and then build systems that, you know, kind of like the cap and trade system that optimize against that, so that you know, we aren't fighting economics, you know, every time we're trying to do something or move forwards. We aren't fighting a sort of a very right.
Yeah. Whoa. Manuel, HK is
sorry,
newcomer in the circle.
Go ahead.
No.
Manuel, go ahead. I just want to say, that one of the things that I'm hearing that we have in common around all this stuff, and maybe this is oversimplifying it too much, but sort of at the core of all of these challenges are, you know, sort of belief systems, right? And understandings of, you know, sort of theological understandings of the role of technology and perfection of humanity. You know, the idea that technology is a tool for sort of taking humans to this sort of point of singularity. You know, like all of that stuff that's going on. These are really fundamental stories that we're not necessarily on this call telling ourselves, but that our societies are telling ourselves. And I've been doing a lot of work on this problem in climate. And I think that the same problems, it's the same kinds of conversations that are at the core of the problems that we're describing, which is that we need some way to shift the sort of the belief system and the moral and sort of value creation frameworks that upon which we make decisions. What is the common sense of how neoliberal economies work is that we continue to grow, we continue to build greater and greater technologies, and the outcome of those heroes of our neoliberal system, like quote unquote heroes like Elon Musk, for example, like those are the people who have really figured out how to solve the problems of the world. Like all of those ideas and all of those assumptions come from a really deep place. And so one of the things I've been trying to think about is, like, how do we shift the stories, and how do we shift, and like a tiny problem, like how do we get to a place where what seems like common sense is disrupted?
Yeah, so I have an answer to that question, and the answer is H.K. Dunstan has to write a best-selling science fiction novel, which it is in her to write, because that's where I find out everything I should be reading. Is I reach out to H.K. But on that point, more seriously, in terms of belief systems, read a great science fiction novel a long while back called The Punch Escrow, which is about a future in which a certain kind of instantaneous teleportation has become possible. And it's now in ubiquitous use. The catch is nobody actually knows how it works. And we don't care because it's so fucking useful, right? I mean, Tokyo to Buenos Aires is a snap, right? And the story, right, is about somebody who knows, who finds out how it works. And of course, it's not a pretty story, right? And this is, again, like the Promethean story of technology told to us yet again, right? Okay, the cost of technology of certain kinds, and our use, more importantly, our use of those technologies, we hide the cost. We hide what it really costs, right? And we are so attached and so strongly desirous of the life that these things make possible, right? We're prepared to ignore the cost, right? And as a lot of scholars and activists have made abundantly plain in the last say 100 years, the cost of building the global industrial system was slavery, human slavery. That was the cost, right? And yet we have again repeated, a rather successful effort at largely disguising and forgetting about that. I mean, we make a mention here and there, right? So changing belief, like, sure, important, and it's one of the things that we have in the toolkit. But at some point, we have to start paying attention to the true cost of what we do and what we choose. Robin, hand up.
Oh, fantastic! The last word you used was the word I was going to bring up. Yeah, I have to bring all this down, way down to my level. This has gotten really big, and it covers a lot of ground. And the word choose is something that I've been interested in. The fact that we're able to make choices, right? That makes us incredibly human to be able to do that, And it just feels like there are themes going around in this entire discussion that pertain to smarter choices. How do we make smarter choices? How do we make better choices? And the big mother is, how do we make a responsible choice? Like, it seems like just the very fact that we can make choices is what's critical. And when the way I'm using AI, it sort of helps me out. Yeah. I can assemble a nice bibliography, based on the questions that I ask, this type of thing, so I can raise my voice, etc. But it's all in the effort to improve my choice, right? So I wonder if we could sort of start there, because responsible choice, I don't even want to go there, right? I just can't yet, but just examining that idea of a better choice.
Yep.
As
Now
it pertains to whatever you wish.
Yeah, so I just want to take that back to kind of circle it around to where Michael started this conversation, which was the proposal that Michael and I collaborated on for the OpenAI, and we're happy to share that with folks if you're interested in looking at it. I can just pop a link in the chat. But yeah, this issue of choice is something that we kind of discussed as well, and like in the face of not the 99.9% of people not understanding like how AI technology works, a lot of that is purposeful because of the big tech playbook and the arms race that's happening, that the most important developments of AI are happening behind closed doors. The fact that it's so early in the conversation that we don't understand the full gamut of risks and the promise and the peril. What is it that we can meaningfully engage democratically around on the topic of AI? And so the question we chose to focus on was the question of consent, which is one of the choices that is most fundamental. It's shown up so much in the data privacy conversation. And we've seen how well-meaning attempts to regulate consent have led to the trivialization of it. Like GDPR has led to all of those cookie acceptance buttons that we click. And I know a professor at University of Toronto who's deep in privacy and data, did a calculation that I think you would have to spend 10 years of your life reading to read the end user license agreements of all of the software that you've agreed to. So, so this idea of meaningful consent, and as we look at generative AI becoming ubiquitously deployed across society, if we're going to have a trusting and trustworthy relationship between humans and AI, then we need to take seriously this question of what is meaningful consent. And so, yeah, that was kind of the topic that we wanted to engage the public on, because everybody has lived experience with consent, both in a technology realm as well as in many other aspects of life, building relationships based on consent. And it's one of the questions that opens a portal up from that touch point of that moment of granting consent into some of the really big and more complex questions of AI, like explainability. Because how can you consent to a black box like this teleportation technology that Michael was talking about? Like, how is it meaningful consent if you don't understand the hidden unintended consequences, if you don't understand the bias, if you don't understand the copyright infringements that were used to generate that experience for you? So, so yeah, I think that's like one of the things that we had a really interesting conversation around, is like in this sprawling and emerging technology, where is a focal point that we can engage a democratic conversation. And then to link it into the System 3 theme of this gathering, the other thing I want to just highlight from the proposal is this idea of constitutive intelligence and hybrid intelligence that we talked about. So we kind of started playing around with the idea of a constitution because of the power of constitutions, but constitution is very static. And so then we shifted to constituting. Like, what does it mean in with a technology that's developing faster than exponential, and that will continue to evolve and have unintended consequences, how do you continually constitute that? And what would be the kind of constitutive intelligence that you would need to do this? And so we proposed a weaving together of 5 different kinds of intelligence. We thought that there is the intelligence of experts, which we've already discussed quite a bit on this call, and like the role of the subject matter expert to create a common base of understanding, people who've thought deep and meaningfully about these topics and done disciplined research. Then there is the intelligence of lived experience, the civic intelligence of citizens, which I think is most relevant to answering Adrian's question of like, what are we building these technologies for? Like, what are these tools trying to enable? What is a good life? What is a flourishing future? That is where citizens can talk about values and visions and motivations and aspirations, that then the experts can respond to. Well, here are some technologies that put us on a pathway towards that. The third kind of intelligence that we considered was indigenous wisdom, and the role of that in situating us and putting us in right relationship with ourselves, with nature, with each other, so that we could not just make another colonizing project out of the way that we set up governance around AI. Then there was the intelligence of the artificial intelligence, which ironically, the conversation of governing AI cannot be had without AI being a participant in that and an enabler of that conversation, because of the very speed at which AI is developing. To imagine democratic deliberations on the scale that's necessary globally, I think there is no way other than to embrace those tools as part of the process. And then lastly, there is this constitutional layer of the design of the container and the process that brings all of these other intelligence together in a way that balances the power asymmetries, and brings the different kinds of intelligence together, so that each of them can play to their strengths, and each of them can contribute to a collective intelligence that's more than the sum of the parts. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of put that on the table as like the system 3 aspect of this is the weaving together of these 5 different forms of intelligence, because I don't think that anything in the existing regulatory playbook can deal with this challenge that we're facing at the speed and the inclusion that is required.
Yeah, I'll just, if I can add just one short thing to that. One of the things that we had in mind as we were working through our thinking and conversation in this proposal was, part of the challenge was to use or model elements of the citizen assembly kind of model of deliberation. It's clear that was some of the background. And citizen assemblies, for those that know anything about them, are generally face-to-face things, and importantly, they have a certain kind of scale that's purpose-built to their task, which is meant to enable a certain kind of reasoning. They have they're face-to-face, they're extended in time, to give time to hearing many sides of something, to consider, to think through, to talk through, and so on and so on. And of course, System 3 is premised on the intelligence that emerges from conversation, and there's an irreplaceable thing there on the one hand. On the other hand, we were given the constraint that this was a process we had to design that we could put 500 people, at least 500 people through. And we talked, Alex and I, sort of late in the process, about whether we might want to actually protest that constraint, and assert that the kind of problem that we were being asked to consider, asking others to consider, just doesn't scale to that level of participation. And for a bunch of reasons, we decided not to, and we decided to find a way to tackle the constraint. And the thing that makes me glad that we did is not that we arrived at the magic answer, but that we had to continue to wrestle with a problem, which we're going to face and do face one way or another, which is we have problems of scale that are not going to go away, right? That doesn't mean that conversations of this size aren't desirable, aren't great to have, worth having, whenever we can have them. But it doesn't mean that there are all kinds of things that we need to be able to be active about that can't wait, or be premised only on this kind of engagement, and yet need to benefit from collective intelligence in ways that we don't have good designs for right now. And so, I mean, I hope one way or another, we get to build some kind of practical experiment around this sort of multiple hybrid intelligence that we've envisioned, because I do think this context would be a good test of it. And reasoning about AI is hardly its only potential application. We got about 8 minutes left, so I'm gonna start looking at landing the plane. Manuel, maybe it's let's see, it's only 6 o'clock where he is, so he may be putting kids to bed at this point. Any lingering thoughts? Things.
Do we need to land the plane?
Oh well, you know me, Manuel. I never really get off the plane.
It's more like a balloon.
Yeah, should be probably
High altitude balloon. Thank you for putting this together. I am indeed gonna jump off a little early, but I do think that there is something quite important that has been mentioned that maybe would be worth putting a few words together on paper, and that is the concern is warranted about AI, but what is interesting is that we have not said what we need time for, right? We have said as a society, many in society have complained about its dangers, but they have not framed the opportunities or the way to think about it in ways that are changing of the system we live in now. So that's a little bit what I wanted to say.
Yep. Appreciate that. Other lingering thoughts? I'm really going to sit with that one. What do we want time for, and what kind of time do we want? In fact, certainly, I think one of the things that I find really defective in the regulation conversation is, like, okay, let's say we give you a blank check to regulate, and you would do what tomorrow? It's not clear to me that sort of that pathway actually helps us get closer to something. And again, one of the themes that came up in this work that we just did was really, looking backward from AI, do we have the relationship to increasingly technology that is increasingly part of the environment in which we live, right? Inescapably. And And if we can't escape it, and perhaps don't want to entirely, that doesn't mean that we have to accept our current relationship to it. So how do we go about thinking about and changing that? I think this too, we think too seldom about our ability to change things, and Robin brought up the question of choice, but more broadly than that, we can and do change things all the time. The best things human beings have created are changeable systems. And there are lots of things to learn from them. Yeah, that's where I'll be spending my time. All right. Well, it feels like a natural place to end. I will say it was lovely to see you all. I was glad, in a way, that we had a smaller group this time, and some more sort of intimate conversation. So thanks for everybody showing up. Thanks for the participation, and stay in touch. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye.